Hi, this is Kim Hammer, pastor of Saline Baptist Church in the community of Tull outside Benton, with your devotion taken from the book of Joshua, chapter 18, going through chapter 21 and verse 45. We find that when you look at chapter 18 and verse 3, Joshua asks them the question, the nation of Israel, why have you not gone out and inherited your land? And the response was because there were no borders established as far as who would get what territory. So Joshua responded by taking 3 men from each tribe and forming a survey party and sent them out. I think about how when this country was settled, how that they went out and they surveyed the land and they mapped it and they identified all the locations that were in the territory that were in the area. So it was with the nation of Israel. They surveyed the land, they jotted down every city, they jotted down every creek, every mountainside, every portion of the region, and they put it on a map and they brought it back to Joshua. Then Joshua displayed some real wisdom because he did not arbitrarily assign geographical territories to each one of the tribes, but instead he cast lots. And in so doing, he put it totally in the hands of God to determine which geographical area would become the territory for each one of the tribes, thus removing him from the position of being able to be accused to being biased or prejudiced toward any of the tribes. Once they went in and they settled, there were 2 things that God said. They had to give to the tribe of Levite their cities that would have pasture land around it so they could graze their herds. This was something that Moses had told them years ago that they would do whenever they came into the promised land, and God was going to take care of those who took care of the spiritual needs of the nation of Israel. God always takes care of his chosen ones. The second thing was they were to establish their cities of refuge, which was something Moses told them they needed to do whenever they inherited the promised land. Some of the key points around the cities of refuge was, number 1, it was to protect the innocent. In the event that an individual was involved in a death that was a result of an accidental situation, God had a city of refuge for them to retreat to so that they could have due justice instead of being turned over to a vigilante mob. The second thing was it did allow for justice in the process of justice because it was established so that the process could work. And that's why we believe today that all people are innocent until proven guilty. The third thing that it did was they were established strategically located throughout the area so that each individual that had the need for the city of refuge would be able to get to it in a quick way and not be overcome by a mob mentality. And then the last thing is that it did not neglect the needs of those who had lost their loved ones. If the person had committed a murder of a premeditated nature or of an intentional nature, we find that they, through the process, would be held accountable and released from the city of refuge in order for retribution to be issued toward them because of the murder. So for those who lost their loved ones, there was the assurance that if it was anything other than accidental or unintentional, that the individual would be delivered to them for justice. When it came to giving out the land in chapter 21 and verse 43, there are some specific points that are mentioned. First of all, God gave them rest on every side. When I thought about those individuals that had to go out and survey the land, I thought about how initially they would be going out into hostile territory. But then you got to remember that God purged the land of every living thing so that when they went out into the land to survey it, there was no resistance because there were no inhabitants of the land. The second thing is that God fulfilled his promise. God always fulfills his promise to you and me. It may take 40 years. It may take some time because of either our actions or because of God's choice, but God will always fulfill his promise. We find also that it tells us that God brought down the enemies so as to allow the nation of Israel to inherit the land. God will eventually bring down all enemies of God's people, and we eventually will enter the promised land. And the last thing I want to focus on is what I mentioned a while ago, is that it tells us that God fulfilled his promise. The one thing that you and I as God's children can rest assured of is that God fulfills his promise. But if you're lost and you don't know Christ as your Savior, remember God has made you a promise too, and is that you would be eternally separated from him for all of eternity. Why not choose to get on the promising side of God so that he can fulfill his promise to you?